Hello everyone, welcome to another Artist Loft drawing class. I'm your instructor, Adrienne Hodge, and this is part 2 of our class on pen and ink pet portraits. So we started last week and did our layout using graphite pencils, and we sketched our pet, all the value shapes of the pet, and some contour lines and things like that. And everybody had a great start, at least the folks who held up their examples at the end of class last week. So I'm excited to see how these turn out. I know a lot of people maybe kept going with the graphite and adding lots of value to it. So if that was the case with yours and you have a lot of shading using the graphite, you might want to start again and do a sketch that's a little loose and empty so that we can add the pen and ink, because it's at the end of the class I'm going to be erasing my pencil lines, and we're going to have something that just shows mainly the pen and ink lines. So I'll go ahead and switch to my tabletop view and review supplies. So last week we had the graphite pencils and an eraser and a drawing or a sketch pad, all in the Artist Loft brand. And this week we're going to be using a set of the Artist Loft illustration pens, and I have the set with the 0.5, the 0.3, and the 0.1 of illustration pens. And you're definitely going to want all 3 of those. So if you only have one nib of a pen, well, you'll just see why the benefits of having all 3 of those nibs. And if you're interested in following me online, you can find me on Instagram at Adrienne Hodge Art, or Facebook, Adrienne Hodge Fine Arts. And there's some of my personal work on my business cards there. And after class, I try to always do a little Q&A on Instagram, a live Q&A for 30 minutes after class, starting at 7:05 p.m. Central Standard Time. So if you want to join me over there and you have any lingering questions after class, I can answer those there. And if you want to even just watch that later, I usually pin them to my IG TV on Instagram. Oh, and before I forget, I wanted to mention the classes that we have coming up soon. Next week's class on the 20th, I can't believe it's already the 20th next week. For some reason that felt far away before I said it, but we've got a class on drawing noses using inverted light. So inverted light is like what we've been using for the pet portrait, where the light has been inverted. All the darks are light and all the lights are dark. And we're going to be using that to draw noses. So I see that Chanel just dropped that premium class link into the chat. And even though I thought I held my finger on my portrait of Biscuit, I just lost it in my sketchbook, so let me find it again real quick. And while I'm, oh, there it is, I went right to it. I was gonna say, while I was waiting to find that in my sketchbook, I might go ahead and mention the 2 classes that would be very supplemental to this one tonight, because I am gonna breeze well, I'm going to review these, the tonal, or excuse me, the value shading techniques. But if you are brand new to drawing and you've never done, used these shading techniques before, like we're going to be using with the pens, then we had 2 classes on these 4 shading techniques. So we had one class on hatching and cross hatching, and another class on stippling and scribbling. And Chanel said she could find those and drop those into the chat for you all. I had somebody even message me on the side this week asking about those. So you definitely want to look at those classes if you're, brand new to the shading techniques, but I am going to review them in just a moment here as well. And the other class that you might want to refer back to, because I might be breezing past this tonight, is the very first class we ever had. It was on Intro to Graphite and Drawing Forms, because I'm going to be talking about following the contours a lot. And we talked about this last week as we were mapping out this photograph of this dog, Biscuit. But we're going to be actually doing that with the pen and ink tonight. We're going to be following the contours of the form, following the curves of the roundness of the head and the neck and around the eyes, following those kind of the dip and elevation that we're seeing on Biscuit or on your own pet, because a lot of you are drawing your own pets. So if you're struggling with making it look three-dimensional and things are looking kind of flat, then you definitely want to check out that first class in this series. And then almost every other class, I feel like, in this drawing series that's been going on for 9 or 10 months now, I have talked about the contour lines of a form and the value shape of applying shading in a way that follows the contours of a form. So if you're struggling with that, that first class will be an introduction to drawing forms for you and could be helpful, but every other class in this series, I feel like I've touched on that in some way. So, and tonight will be no exception, but I am gonna go kind of quickly once we get rolling here. So if I go too quickly for you, just keep in mind that you can watch the recording of this class later on YouTube. You can always go back and slow it down and pause it and catch up. So if you're drawing Biscuit right along with me, kind of a step-by-step process with me, then that will be really helpful. Okay, so let me get back to my my drawing from last week. Oh, before I do that, I got to review these shading techniques. I'm like so ready to get rolling here. Okay, so I did a bit of a review last week, but not much. Okay, so just take one of your pens. I'm going to take my 0.5 pen here, and I'm just going to briefly go over these shading techniques and explain the value scale. So our gold standard of shading is tonal shading. So that's smooth, continuous shading that follows the contours of the form, and it's a gradual shift from light to dark or dark to light, but it's still smooth and continuous, kind of the same tone throughout, right? You cannot achieve tonal shading with a pen. It's the one shading technique that you would be very challenged to do with a pen, because we can't make a pen do these smooth, continuous movements. Almost, you have to make one mark at a time. So we're not going to be using tonal shading tonight with our pen and ink. We're going to be using these other 4 shading techniques, and these are done in graphite, but all of these shading techniques can be done just exactly the same in pen. By just applying one mark at a time. So the first one is hatching, and we've got this scale. So if you want to draw to practice, you know, if you're absolute beginner and want to practice drawing a long skinny rectangle and then labeling it 0 and 10, and you can, you know, label all the way across 1 through 10 as well. But your 0 is going to be your absolute white or your blank paper, and your 10 is going to be your solid black. So where it gets to solid black in the values is where you're going to try to have solid black with your hatching marks. But the way that you do that is through one mark at a time. So apologies for my left-handedness here. It's hard to not cover it up, but let's say this is my 10 on the value scale. I'm doing one directional lines for my hatching. So it's just one directional lines, but they repeat and they follow the contours of the form until we get to a solid black. So you just continue overlapping your one directional lines that follow the contours of the form until you don't see any paper showing through. And then for your lighter values, you continue to space out and you still overlap your lines, but you let the paper kind of come through a little bit. And then when you get to about your 5, 6, that's when you want to start letting up on your pressure with your pen. So practice having marks where you're not pressing down on your pen. And you don't want to press down too hard on your pen anyway, or else you'll push the nib in on your pen and it won't be a very good pen anymore. So you always want to be mindful of that anyway. But you let up on your pressure even more to the point where you get, a lighter line to happen. And then for your 1s and your 2s and your 3s on this value scale, it's really all about that light pressure on the pen. Try to just do a baby's breath of a line and let it kind of disappear. And that's where you're going to have more of implied line. I also had an entire class on implied line. Chanel, if you didn't mind finding the link to that one, that would also be another good class to refer back to for tonight. Or if you're watching this later on YouTube, the class was just, if you search Artist Loft and implied line, you should be able to find that class. And there's a whole, it's an hour-long class on implied line where we do an exercise that really helps you to understand how to achieve implied line in your work. Okay, so that's hatching. And then for the absolute white, you leave it blank. You put no lines. And then for cross hatching, you're going to have multiple directional lines. So you might start with a diagonal line and then overlap that with a horizontal line, a vertical line. And the thicker the nib of the pen that you're using to do this, by the way, the faster it's going to be able to achieve your solid black. If you're using your 0.1 pen to do this, it's going to take you a lot longer. But it's the same idea. We're just overlapping those multiple directional lines until we get to a solid black. And I think I will use some cross hatching in Biscuit's eyes tonight, and that might be the only place. But the way that I would lighten up my cross hatching is I like to just kind of pull it all the way down on a value scale and just continue overlapping, but let up on my pressure as I go. So it takes a while to build up all of these value scales. I'm definitely not going to perfectly finish these, but you can see how it looks with the graphite there, but it's the same thing with the pen. You can get a lighter value with a pen by letting up on your pressure, same way as you can with graphite. You just can't erase it. So if you go too dark, then it's difficult to erase. So if you're struggling with pressing down too hard, getting too dark of a value right off the bat with the pen, then you're going to want some good old-fashioned practice. Practice is key, guys. It's just all about that practice. I wish I could tell you that there was some magical shortcut between an absolute beginner and somebody who's drawing, something like this. And I'm going to hopefully, get you as close as I can there as an absolute beginner. But if you're seeing people in the class tonight whose drawings feel more advanced, it's probably because they've put in a lot of practice. And, just try not to compare yourself to other artists or, to instructors, or, don't compare yourself to anyone, because you're on your own unique journey and it takes time. So give yourself some grace and some space to be wherever you are in your drawing practice, and know that if something is frustrating and not happening for you right away, that it's just a matter of time and putting in the time. Okay, so stippling is the dots. So we're using lots of dots and we're building up those dots until we get to a solid black. So this is the one I always joke, if you're having trouble sleeping later tonight, you can finish your stippling value scale, because it definitely takes a lot of time. And we definitely want to be careful not to be banging our pen, because that's gonna, to try to make it go faster, because that'll make the nib, ruin the nib as well on our pens. And we also don't want to go too fast, because we might get these little slash marks like that. So it's very slow going to build up our stippling to the point where we get to a solid black, but using that thicker nib, like I'm using the 0.5 nib, is going to get you there a little faster. And then you let up on your pressure and space them out. Same thing for all of them to get those lighter values with a pen. It's all about spacing and pressure. So less pressure and more spacing for lighter values and letting it kind of disappear until we get to a blank paper. Scribbling, for those of you who are impatient, like I sometimes am when it comes to drawing, just because I don't know, I just want to see my results faster these days. I used to use stippling a lot. Stippling is very good for beginners. It may seem counterintuitive because it takes so much time, but that's, if you're really patient and you're a beginner, stippling is the best shading technique to use, because if you use your 0.1 nib and you start out very slow and build those values, it's just one dot. So if you make a mark that you didn't mean to be there with the pen, it's just one dot, right? And you can live with one dot you didn't mean to be there. So that's why stippling is great for beginners, but it requires a lot of practice. Scribbling is exactly what it sounds like. It is scribbling, but we are overlapping that scribbling until we get to a solid black. And then we're spacing it out and using less pressure for our lighter values. So you can fill in your empty values on your pet portrait much faster using scribbling than you can with stippling, but you also, have to be mindful of making marks that you don't want to be there. So, okay, any questions about those shading techniques before I move on and start filling in my my layout of Biscuit from last week?
It doesn't look like we have any questions yet.
Okay, great. All right, now I have to find my little tape marker for my other Biscuit sketch.
We just had a question come in, actually. Is there a general rule which shading technique to use when and where?
That is probably the number one question that I get asked the most. I've been teaching a pen and ink class in person since 2013, kind of paused during the pandemic, but anyway, no, there's not. It's really up to you and your preference, although there definitely are shading techniques that make more sense than others to use. Like when we're looking at Biscuit's fur, for example, the shadows that are happening in between just the pigment on the fur and the nature of the hairs kind of follow a hatching mark, so they look like it would obviously make sense to use hatching. Like I don't think it would make sense to use scribbling right there if we were working with maybe a labradoodle or a cat, or a dog that has very curly fur, then or like a poodle, scribbling might make more sense for that fur. But for like a short-haired dog like this, or even a long-haired dog, hatching would make the most sense, because you're just going to have longer hatching marks for the long hair. But yeah, some of them are pretty intuitive in that it just makes sense, and then other ones it's kind of just up to you. You could definitely draw Biscuit with stippling. All we're going to be doing here, it's like we created a paint by number with our value shapes, and we're going to be filling in our value shapes using the shading techniques and following the contours of the form. But yeah, like in the nose right here, it feels like little stippled dots to me. So stippling would make sense in the nose. So see how I used stippling on the nose there. That's a great question, and that question always comes up. Okay, one thing I'm going to do that you all maybe did already from last week, and I kind of started doing this at the end of the class last week, is just softening my lines and starting to erase some of these lines that I don't necessarily need, because looking at my photograph, it just, the lines, there's not a hard line here. So this is what I'm talking about with implied line. We don't want to force any hard lines that are not there. I try to make it almost a game with myself when I'm drawing, where I, try to make no lines in my drawings. And that might seem really crazy to say, because any mark that we make and then pull that mark along becomes a line, right? But then some of these lines are actually outlined to a shape. You know, there's a value shape here. So even like this little shape right here, the space in between the nose, we talked about last week, how that could be a shape instead of a line. It could be like a little caterpillar shape, or oh, what's another good example? Well, right here, this, you know, I wouldn't put a line here at all. Like I drew a line to help designate where all those features were going to go for the layout, and so that everybody could follow along with me last week. But now I want to apply value that's going to, you know, be very loose and implied and give this cool effect with the pens. And so I really don't need all these dark lines. And also I used a darker pencil than I wanted you to last week so that you could see what I was doing, but I don't want to be smearing this graphite around while I apply the pen. And yeah, it just felt kind of stiff the way I drew it, for, you know, following along purposes. And also I think I made my ear a little big. I'm going to just adjust a few proportional things here that I maybe rushed past last week. So I'm going to draw lightly. You might not even see the changes that I'm making because I'm going to do them very lightly. So this is one of those maybe annoying instructor things right now, because it's like, I know that you guys can't see my lines, but because the camera just doesn't pick up an H pencil very well, but I'm just making the ear a little smaller, and also, you know, just to try to capture Biscuit's likeness a little bit more. I noticed that I kind of went out a little far on the nose. Like I put the nose kind of out to here, but then it really comes in a lot. Like the chin comes in a little smaller like that. So just so that I can try to capture Biscuit's likeness a little bit more here. Just softening some of these moments and making it a little more in line with Biscuit's proportions. And same thing with the nose. I went a little wide with the nose. And so if you're just noticing some things about your drawing right now that were maybe not quite in line with the proportions of your pet, now would be a good time to make those adjustments. But the eyes are really super big, so that all looks good. Okay, I think just that little bit makes me satisfied. Okay, so I'm going to start with my smallest nib pen, the 0.1 here. And I'm going to have my photo close by, and just going to start applying those contour lines. Actually, my pencil is really getting in my way there. Honestly, when I draw in pen and ink, I don't put this much graphite on the page. This was, you know, really there for teaching purposes. So if you've got a lot of graphite on your paper right now, you might want to just even take your eraser. If it's in like a paper casing, you can take your eraser on its side and just kind of go like this over the whole drawing. That way your pencil lines don't disappear completely and you can still kind of see them, but it'll just take off all that graphite that's getting in the way. And I know some people put a lot of graphite last week, but yeah, my apologies if you can't see my drawing. It's going to definitely come back to life as we add the pen and ink here. I just want this example to look as impressive as the other one, so all that graphite's just going to drive me nuts, so I had to take it out. Okay, so I'm following the contours around the eye here, and I'm starting out kind of slow and defined on some of these. So I'm filling in that shape that we outlined. We outlined a little shape of a value, and think about each value on that scale from 0 to 10 as being kind of like, if this was paint by numbers, you could maybe even just go through and assign a certain value to each shape that you drew in your layout. So you could go through and say, okay, well, in the center of an eye, in the eye, I need it. This is my photocopy. I need a 10 in the center of the eye. I need a 10 on the other center of the eye. Where's the other places where it gets absolute black? I can see all of those in my inverted light photo. So like inside of the nose is a 10. Right here in this area is a 10. See what I mean? Like we're creating a little paint by numbers, but for our value scale. And then where am I seeing an absolute white with my pencil? So, well, actually, no, I'm going to do that on here because it's just the photocopy. So like I'm seeing a 0 here, like no, this whole shape is all blank paper, right? So I'm going to put nothing here. What am I doing? This is a 0 as well. I wrote 10. I can't erase it. I just kind of scribbled out right there. You get what I'm saying. So everywhere where I'm seeing black in my inverted photo, that's where the absolute white is. So that's the 0 or the blank paper. Right here is also blank paper. And if that's confusing for you, then don't do it. But that might be helpful, especially for, people who are very logical minded like that. That might be extremely helpful for you. And I like to joke that my goal for all of my students is for them to become like Russell Crowe in A Beautiful Mind, where he like looks at a magazine and just like sees all these like patterns and codes and information, where you just look at a photograph and you just immediately like decode the value scale of what application of value is needed for each of those shapes. Like the shapes just jump out at you and you see which value needs to be assigned to each one. That comes after years of practice probably, although maybe you're starting to see that pattern right now. But that's definitely how I feel like I view things after all my years of drawing. It really all comes down to the light. Okay, so I'm just starting out small so I could like take the time to explain what I'm doing, but I am gonna have to speed it up here because we're already halfway through the class. So I'm just following the directional lines, the elevational lines that I see are happening on the fur. I'm following that same curve that I'm seeing, and I'm going really slow. And it might even help to like zoom in on your picture on your phone, or like cover up the rest of the photograph with a piece of paper so that you're only looking at that small part of what you're drawing at a time. Try not to get ahead of yourself where you're trying to go too fast, because as someone who's been working with pen and ink for a very long time, and ink is my go-to medium, like in my artwork that I flashed on my business cards, I use primarily calligraphy ink, but I started out doing just a lot of pen and ink drawings like this. And the way that I got pretty good pretty fast at pen and ink drawing was I had an entire sketchbook in the summer of, I think, 2010, where I didn't use an eraser. And so I had this pen and ink class that I taught here in Austin for several years called Ditch Your Eraser, but I would joke the name of the class should really be Learn to Depend on Your Eraser a Little Less, because it really wasn't about never using an eraser, but that practice of not using an eraser for that entire sketchbook that summer really helped me to embrace the mistakes that would happen when I was drawing in pen only, and then to figure out ways to kind of troubleshoot in the drawing so that those the quote unquote mistakes didn't show up as much. And it definitely helped the learning curve. So if you can handle the frustration of not being able to erase and just drawing in pen only to develop your skills and practice, that would be really helpful. And I realized I changed pens without saying. I changed to my 0.5 pen, to the thickest nib pen, to start to fill in this solid black. And if I don't tell you which pen I switched to, I guess just interrupt me. But not everybody right now is drawing Biscuit. Lots of people are drawing their own pets right now. So you're going to switch to whatever pen makes the most sense. I'm on a dark value right now. I want to get to a solid black here. I went ahead and sketched the pupil shape there, but I'm probably, well, I am not probably, I'm going to cover that up to the point that we're not going to really see any light coming through right here. But following that cross hatching line that we put in last week that follows the elevational curve here. And I'm having to resist the urge to like reteach how to draw this eye or why I did the lines like this all over again, but that was all in class 1. So you can go back and check that out if you forgot or you missed it or you didn't draw yours like that and it's causing you some trouble. One question that I get a lot in my pen and ink classes about moments like this where it's going to be a solid black is like, well, why not just, you know, shade it like you would coloring with a crayon, you know, like why follow the contours if it's just going to be a solid black anyway. And there are so many reasons. For one, the eye reads information. The viewer looking at your drawing is reading the information that you provided for them. You provided, you know, visual information in a way that feels familiar so that they can, or hopefully you did, so that they can read it as a dog. And so they can read each form as the form that you want them to read it as. And so the more you can, you know, describe it to them visually as the thing that it is, it's rounded, it's curved. If you just shade it in flat, it's going to look flat. Even though it's going to be a solid black, you're still picking up on those lines. The eye is still going to pick up on those lines. And if you make it flat, then the viewer is going to read it as flat. It's not going to look curved. So make all of those lines curved. And for those of you who are a little more advanced, because I know you are out there, and I've got a few regulars who have been coming back, and this is something that I notice other artists, you know, on my level doing a lot and talking about a lot, and I do this as well in my professional work. I try to make every mark that I make count, you know, and I know that that's a lot to say to a beginner. This class was marketed as intermediate, and I know we've got some advanced folks out there, but you know, if you can be really patient with yourself and apply every mark that you make in a deliberate way, that reads in the final work so much. And one trick that I do to make every mark count is I kind of hover over the page. I don't necessarily put my pen down every time that you see me making a movement. I'm kind of, you know, pacing it a little bit. I'm visually making a mental note of like where I'm about to make a line. And that's something I had to make effort to do early on in my, you know, more professional practice, where I had to like, you know, just be very mindful of that. But now it becomes almost like part of the muscle memory that I do, where I just, you know, I hover a little bit and I don't always put my pen down on every mark, if that makes sense. So that can be another way to, you know, just control what you're doing with the pen if it feels like it's getting away from you. And if you're just really frustrated drawing with the pen, like right off the bat, where it feels like a lot of the lines that you're making are not satisfactory to you, then I would maybe pull out a piece of scratch paper and draw your the part of the pet that you're on in that moment that you're getting frustrated. Just do a little study, you know, of the eye, or do a little study of the nose. Just kind of break it down into parts and just, you know, sketch it. Maybe do it with your pencil again first. Get to a place where you're feeling comfortable. you know, because art making should be fun. And if you're not having fun because you're getting really frustrated with it, then take a break, take a step back, get a snack, you know, take a walk around the block or sleep on it, look at it the next day. You'll probably find something that you like about it the next day if you don't like it. And then, you know, try again because it's all about that practice. Okay, so I'm just building up to my solid black here in the eyes. And my goal, because it's I have such limited time here to try to get this to look like my other example, but my goal is to at least get all of my solid black areas filled in, and some I just switched to a different 0.5 because that one was drying up, by the way. Sometimes a pen that's drying up can be really helpful for your lighter values. So if that's happening, don't necessarily throw it away because you could use it for those lighter values if you struggle with your lighter pressure on your pens. But yeah, my goal right now is to get all my solid blacks filled in and then to go back and try to get some of those lighter values that I started going, but we'll see how far I can get in this hour. I'm definitely going to tell you how to do everything that I did or touch on everything that I did here. And if I miss anything, you guys can ask me. I'll hopefully have a few minutes left at the end of meeting that goal to fill in any gaps that I didn't talk about. Okay, so this is the next solid black area, but it doesn't get all the way solid black. It might be kind of nice to do some stippling here at the edge of this shape so that some light peeks in, or maybe do stippling for all of this, just so that it doesn't feel like we just colored it in solid black, because there's definitely a little bit of, it's more of like a 9 on the value scale. It's not a solid 10, but we want it to get pretty dark, that little comma shape I talked about last week. And then over here, we've got this little C shape on the nostril. I'm going to build that one up using some stippling. And I'm just following the organic shape that we outlined with our pencil last week. This should be pretty mindless if you did your layout to, you know, satisfaction. It should be pretty easy to fill in all of these shapes without stopping to think too much. Except one thing I just accidentally did is I filled in something that was supposed to be blank right there. There's a little space. I talked about it last week. I called it the letter R, but as I was talking about being mindless, I just mindlessly covered that up. But that's good. This is a good teachable moment. Okay, so what do you do if you accidentally do what I just did? If you accidentally fill in something that was supposed to be blank paper, the first thing you do is take a deep breath and let it go. Don't be upset with yourself. It happens, right? And then just decide whether or not you want to go ahead and fill it in, or if you want to just like I just did, I just went ahead and filled it in. But the advice I try to give everybody in these pen and ink classes or when working with ink is leave it alone for now. Like, come back to it after you've honestly calmed down, because I find people get really frustrated when that happens. I don't get as frustrated when it happens now because I've been working with ink so long that it's just like, well, oh well, that happened. Just, you know, it's not that noticeable. I think it felt more noticeable to leave it alone than to just go ahead and fill it in right there. So that's what I did. But if you do that, I would take a minute and step back from it, or work on a different part of your sketch for a while, and then come back to it and decide what you want to do, because you can't erase it. Starting over is always an option, but I recommend pushing through, because starting over sometimes leads to more frustration, and then there might be something about your original drawing that is hard to reproduce when you start over. So, you know, starting over should be like the last resort. Okay, so I moved down into this other area of the mouth where it gets to a solid black here, and I'm gonna go back to my hatching lines here, and I'm following the contours of, it's like biscuits, gums right there that are showing up pretty solid black. And then here's where I'm gonna switch to a 0.3 nib and try to really do this kind of wispy thing, because there's a bunch of white whiskers on the mouth. And so I want to have kind of an implied line thing happening here where I just almost imply the sense of the white whiskers through the blank paper. So it's having to kind of plan ahead right there, or just to be able to visualize ahead how that's going to look in the end when you do it that way. But if you just kind of leave a gap here and there between your black hatching lines, it'll kind of feel like those white lines are going through. I switched to a 0.3 nib. I saw somebody just asked which pen I was on. So I'm following the contours right here. And they kind of radiate out a little bit like that. And that can also, you know, by doing that, all the blank paper moments in between can be read as the white whiskers. So that's the idea right there. And yeah, a 0.1 nib might work well here as well. I'm just trying to go a little faster with my example, so I'm using a little bit bigger nib, but I am pulling up on my pressure quite a bit so that I'm not getting the full effect of that 0.3, so that it's feeling kind of light and loose. And then just notice, you know, how dark the value does get right there. We maybe need to overlap quite a bit until we get to the value that we're seeing there. That's more of like a 6 or a 7, right? So if I numbered that with my paint by number values there, this is where I need to be filling in, overlapping a lot, but not to the point where I get to a solid black, but overlapping until I get to more of a medium value here, and then a little less on the chin area, because that's where a lot more white whiskers are happening. And then I want to make sure that these whiskers kind of hug, these hatching lines kind of hug the contours of the mouth. See how they kind of follow a downward curve right there? I'm trying to give the illusion of those white whiskers up here following that downward curve as well. I'm gonna go ahead and start building up some of these values as well. I need like a 6 or a 7 right around here as well. And this is where it gets to maybe an 8 or a 9 on my value scale. So I need to overlap quite a bit. Stippling or hatching would work here. So if you're not liking how your hatching lines are showing up, maybe build up some values with your stippling right around here, and then you can layer your hatching on top of them. And stippling might be a little better here as well for like the little almost feeling of freckles that we're getting where the whiskers are, you know, growing right there. So maybe we'll do like a little patchwork moment of those, but I'm actually using just smaller hatching lines because that makes more sense, I think. And there are a few moments where the whiskers do show up kind of dark right there. They don't all look white, so it would be nice to do a couple of long wispy ones coming out just to give a little more character there. All right, I don't want to stay in one place for too long because I don't want you to stay in one place for too long. So I'm going to move up here to the bridge of the nose area. And that's pretty light, but I made it a little darker in this drawing. So I'm maybe not going to make it quite so dark. I'm going to use my 0.1 nib right here and have those. Oops, that photo go. So I want it to follow the contours of the nose, but also I want to emphasize that little bridge right there. So I maybe exaggerated it in my other one, so I might as well go ahead and exaggerate it here too. And I'm following the curve of the nose here, so it, you know, we get the sense of the elevation shift that's happening. Because there's a big elevational shift happening here between the nose and the eye. And if I just left it blank, it might not help the viewer to read the information that we're trying to make them read. So I'm kind of just adding some wispy little hatching line moments that follow what I'm seeing around the eye again here, but also noticing how that shifts from where it's hugging the nose to then there's like almost like a line of a radius of fur going up that way. And if that's hard for you to see, you can look at it in the inverted light. See how there's that line that's white, but the mid-tone of gray is everything that's showing up light gray here. So everything that's white right here is actually black. So having that little, you know, radius of hatching lines can help the viewer to read that elevational shift that's happening. Because sometimes it's hard to notice those lighter values in gray, but when you look at the opposite light, then you can see that it's there. And it's just easy to get bogged down. Probably the number one mistake that beginning artists make, but I'm guilty of it too sometimes, is trying to draw the whole thing rather than the parts, not slowing down and appreciating every tiny moment of the drawing, but trying to like rush ahead to the part where the whole thing is magically coming to life. And that's only going to happen if you slow down and focus on some individual parts. So the easiest way to make that magic happen for me is to jump around a lot and never stay in one place for too long. And that way I don't get too, I don't overwork any one area, but also I'm giving each area some focused attention. Okay, here's where I really want an implied line to happen. I want to see the edge of the head right here, but I want to leave that kind of unfinished looking because that's all white fur. So I'm just really going to just do like a few little wispy moments like that I'm seeing, even though those whiskers are white coming out. One way you could achieve that white is to just, here, I'm going to do it on this for a second. This is something you could do if you really have some patience. You could make like a designated area for that white whisker of blank paper, these 3 white whiskers that come out like this, like make a little, like designate 3 little hair moments, like I did each side of it. And then I'm going to take my biggest nib, my 5 And I'm just gonna slowly start to build in that negative space with just a solid horizontal line, or solid hatching horizontal line. So I'm gonna make this a solid black, because the background in the photo is pretty dark black. And if you really had the patience to build this up and do this, this would be a really neat effect, because then you're going to suggest, so you want to suggest kind of an uneven edge here to the fur, right? But then you're filling it all in the background, and you're going to push that white forward. So you're going to fill in everything that's black, and you're going to leave your blank paper blank in these areas that you designated to be white, the edge of the fur and these whiskers jutting out. And at the end of all of your patient filling this in, you should have, the white will show up. I think that's enough to make sense, but that's one option there. Or the other option is to just do a very wispy line and just go ahead and make it black, even though it's a white whisker sticking out, but just to add that little bit of character there in a loose way. And then I'm just giving it kind of a very unfinished line with my 0.1 all the way around where it's white, where it's the edge of the white fur. Even though there shouldn't be a line here, we could just leave it blank and fill in the background to make it come forward. I don't have the time for that, so that's how I did it, right? But the other option would be to go solid dark in your background and push all those white areas forward using your negative space. Oh my gosh, how did that happen? It's 6:55, you guys. We have 5 minutes left. Okay, really quickly here, let me switch back to I went on such a little aside with with that negative space thing. Okay, so we talked about how to fill in all the solid black areas. That was my goal. So you're just going to continue doing what I've done here with Biscuit. You're just going to continue filling in those midtones, building up your hatching lines, following the contours of the fur until you match the level of value that you need. And make sure that you're just following those contours. And if you want, you can maybe take a screenshot of, I'll just leave that on the screen for a second there. You can take a screenshot of my final drawing and then refer back to that to help you if you're drawing Biscuit. If you get a little stuck and you want to see how I resolved that particular area, that would be helpful. And if you're drawing your own pet, you'll just follow these same guidelines to filling in all of those values. And is there anything that I missed? Like, is there any part of this drawing that I feel I didn't at least explain how I did it? I know I didn't quite get all the way there with my other example. It's just the nature of these classes sometimes.
Oh, we had a couple questions come in, so I could go ahead and read those off to you.
Okay.
Really quick. So Joseph asked, what should I do if my pen slipped while I was doing the pupil and it made a mark through the iris?
Oh, just accept that happened, take a deep breath, and decide if you want to try to cover it up, or maybe it could become another line through that window pane in that reflective light of the window that we were seeing there. Or maybe you could try to do another one next to it, make it feel like a whisker that was going over the eye, something like that. And if it just sticks out like a sore thumb, then that's just, you learned something. And next time you'll, hopefully grip your pen in a way that it doesn't happen. Any other questions that if there's anything else like that, join me on my Instagram live, and I'd love to, continue being helpful in that regard, especially people who are working with their own photos of their pets. sometimes in my Q&A after class, I don't get a ton of questions. So I'd love to, help you troubleshoot any issues like that that are, singular to you during that Q&A, or, anything that you just want more coverage of. But I'd love to see some of y'all's examples before we go. We've got 2 minutes. If you want to spotlight your drawing, just hold it up and Chanel can spotlight you so we can see. Oh, look at that. I love how those midtones are coming across on the cat. Very nice. Ooh, yes. Look at those hatching lines. Yeah, just keep going, building up those values. That's looking really nice. Oh, yeah. Oh, I love how you guys are following the contours of your pets. I'm not seeing anything that feels flat there. I'm really feeling the curve of the nose area there. Just keep doing what you're doing. Oh, there's Biscuit. Oh, that's nice and soft. That looks like there was a good amount of graphite underneath there, but it's blending well with the pen. Really nice. Really feeling that curve, that shift from the nose to the plane of the forehead there. Oh, yes. Very nice. Try to, yeah, go like long and loose and wispy with some of those hairs, and it'll really start to feel like a long-haired cat, or even the short hair, just like some long wispy moments like we did with those whiskers. All right. Yeah. Oh, Biscuit like has an emotion in this one. I feel like the eyes are looking a different direction. It gives them a different emotion. I like it. Ooh, that one's really nice. I like how you did that curve of the mouth. It also has kind of a different expression there. It's lovely. You're starting to build up that background with the negative space like I suggested. Cool. I'm excited to see that one finished. Tag me if you post that anywhere so that I can see it when it's done. I'd love to see an example of somebody doing that. Thank you. Oh, yes. I like how you really focused on those dark values. They're like, take your time and just stay patient, because that's so strong. That's such a strong start. Oh, the texture of that fur is really coming across. I can tell you're going really light with your pressure on your pen. All right, well, it's 7:01. Oh, one more. Very nice. Yeah, those are very strong. All those dark areas. That, I mean, that's the main with this drawing. That was the meat and potatoes, were all those solid dark areas. If you can maintain that kind of fade of pressure out into the lighter areas, it'll look great. You're well on your way. All right, let me go back to my forward facing. All right, well, thank you guys for such a great class. I'm really happy with those results. And if you have any more questions, join me on Instagram, and hopefully I'll see you next week in that premium class on drawing noses. The recording for that class will only be sent to folks who registered, so make sure you sign up for that one and don't miss it. All right, thank you. Good night.